So you think you could have survived as a medieval soldier? Think again. In this video, we're breaking down what life was really like for the poor souls who marched into battle with nothing but a stick of prayer and a really bad pair of shoes. We're talking about the brutal training, the starvation, the disease, the battles, and what happened after you made it home. If you made it home at all. But hey, before you get too comfortable, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and drop your city, name, and local time in the comments so we know where in the world you're watching us from. So you want to be a hero with a sword? Let's set the scene. You're standing in a muddy village. Somewhere in the 13th century, you've got calloused hands, a half-rotted tooth, and dreams of glory. Maybe you heard tales around a smoky hearth of noble knights battling dragons or slaying enemies for the love of a lady in a tall stone tower. You probably thought, yeah, I could do that. I could be that guy now. Here's the truth. No, you couldn't. And you really wouldn't want to. The life of a medieval soldier was not what ballads and tavern songs would have you believe. It was brutal, it was filthy, and it was usually short first things first. You wouldn't start out as a knight in shining armor, not even clothes, if you were lucky. And I mean really lucky. Maybe you'd get to carry the knight's armor before you ever wore any yourself. Most likely you'd be a foot soldier, and that meant you were cannon fodder before cannons even existed. Let's talk training, or the lack of it. Most medieval soldiers were peasants pulled from farms with barely any experience holding anything sharper than a pitchfork. Maybe the Lord gave you a spear. Maybe he didn't. You might have had a week or two of drilling, which basically involved marching back and forth, sweating in itchy wool, while some knight shouted at you for not standing straight. There was no boot camp, no structured system, no carefully crafted routine of physical fitness. You just learned on the job, and that job usually involved watching your friends die horribly right next to you. And about those weapons, you think swords were handed out like candy. Think again. Swords were expensive, hard to forge, and usually reserved for the nobility or the really experienced. Instead, you got a spear, a stick with a point on the end, or maybe a rusty axe that hadn't been cleaned since your grandfather's war armor was worse. You want to picture yourself in full steel plate. Forget it. That was like wearing a Ferrari. You'd be lucky to get a dented helmet and a padded gambeson. Basically, a thick quilted coat that soaked up blood, sweat, and rain like a sponging. Here's the kicker. That armor was heavy. Not the sleek movie stuff. We're talking up to 60 pounds of gear on your body, and it got heavier with every drop of water, mud, or blood soaked into it. Let's say you survive training and actually make it to battle. Congratulations. Time for your reward. The chance to stand in the field facing an enemy just like you, equally scared, equally miserable, only with a slightly sharper stick. The battlefield wasn't glorious. It was chaos. No music, no slow motion, only screaming horses, stomping soldiers' blades clashing, and people dying in some of the most gruesome ways imaginable. Injuries were common, and treatment was laughable. Got a cut, you're getting gangrene. Took an arrow to the leg. They'll snap it off and maybe pour wine over the wound if you're lucky. There were no medics, no painkillers, no recovery centers. You were either strong enough to walk it off, or you died in a muddy ditch. Even if you survived the battle, it didn't mean safety. Victory didn't come with a medal. It came with more walking, more hunger, and more orders from people who saw you as expendable meat. Your reward for loyalty might be a moldy piece of bread and a place to sleep in a pigsty. Maybe the local lord tossed you a coin or two. Probably not. Let's not forget disease. Life as a medieval soldier was a walking infection waiting to happen. You shared water, food, and sleeping quarters with dozens of other filthy men. And personal hygiene was a luxury no one had time for. Lice were your constant companion, and dysentery was just part of the deal. And if you dared to desert, which meant running from the army, you could be flogged, branded, or straight up executed. Your life didn't belong to you anymore. You were property of the realm, a breathing blade with no voice. But wait, you say. What about honor? What about the glory of defending your homeland? Sounds noble, right? Sure. But think about what you were actually defending. You weren't fighting for freedom or justice. You were fighting because a noble got into a feud with another noble and needed warm bodies to throw into the meat grinder. You didn't get to vote. You didn't get a say in what the battle was about. You just got told, march east, kill whoever's over there, try not to die, and death wasn't romantic. It was ugly slow. Sometimes immediate, but often not. You could lie there trampled, bleeding, crying for your mother, while rats eyed your body before you even stopped breathing. Still, want to be a soldier? Here's the irony. Though soldiers lived awful lives, they were also essential. These muddy, bloodied men held empires together. They enforced kings' wills, defended borders, collected taxes, and suppressed rebellions. They were the muscle behind the throne, and yet they got none of the praise. The songs weren't about you. They were about knights and lords. You were background noise. You were the guy who fell off a ladder or got shot in the foot by mistake. Heaven help you if you were captured. Prisoners of war in the medieval world weren't often treated with kindness. If you were rich, maybe you'd get ransomed. If you were poor, your captors had no use for you. Torture, execution, or slavery were all on the menu. So, no, it wasn't good to be a medieval soldier. It was terrifying, painful, and thankless. The only upside was that if you died fast, you wouldn't have to deal with all the other awful stuff that came after. Still dreaming of glory? Or are you starting to see why most peasants clung to their shovels instead of swords? Marching toward misery. So, you've survived your first taste of battle. Maybe you didn't lose a limb. Maybe you only cried once. That's impressive. But hold your cheer, because the battle is only a tiny part of your new reality. The real suffering begins between the battles. That's when the marching starts. Imagine this. You're waking up before sunrise in a soaked tunic. Your back hurts from sleeping on the ground, and your boots are still wet from yesterday's rain. You've got to move. Today's march is going to be 20 miles or more, with a sword bouncing on your hip and a pack that feels like it's filled with rocks. There's no breakfast buffet. No fresh water waiting, just some stale bread, if you're lucky, and water from a nearby stream that may or may not give you the runs. And there's no talking back. You don't get to ask, are we there yet? You go where you're told, even if that means trudging through freezing rivers, blistering heat, or ankle-deep mud that wants to eat your shoes. Now, here's where it gets really fun. Roads back then were terrible, and that's being generous. If it rained, you'd walk through sludge. If it was dry, you'd cough up dust with every step. And if your horse or ox died along the way, nobody stopped for you. You were expected to keep moving. Food on the road was a gamble. Soldiers carried what they could, which was almost nothing. You might eat once a day, sometimes less. And when rations ran out, you started raiding villages. You took chickens, bread, grain, whatever you could find. Does that sound noble and heroic? Not really. It was survival, and if you were caught stealing from the wrong people or entering the wrong village at the wrong time, you could get a pitchfork in the gut or worse. Oh, and forget about privacy or personal space. You were sleeping next to 50 other men on the ground. There was no tent, no cozy bedroll. You used your shield as a pillow, if you even had one, and everyone smelled like old cheese, and death. Hygiene on the road was non-existent. Washing your hands was a luxury. Bathing was a fantasy. You were lucky if it rained. You didn't change clothes for weeks, and your socks were probably rotting into your skin. This is the part no one talks about. When you weren't fighting, you were walking. When you weren't walking, you were hungry. And when you weren't hungry or walking, you were trying not to freeze to death in the middle of the night. Winter was the worst. Imagine marching through snow with holes in your boots. Frostbite wasn't rare. Losing fingers or toes was just part of the job. Your armor turned into an icebox. Your breath turned into fog. And when the firewood ran out, you burned anything you could find. And what about injuries? Remember that arrow to the leg from Chapter 1? If it didn't kill you, the infection probably would. Medical help was whatever the camp priest or barber could offer. They'd heat a knife over fire and pray you passed out before they started cutting. There was no time to rest, no time to heal. If you could stand, you marched. If you couldn't stand, you were left behind. That's just how it worked. And speaking of being left behind, let's talk about punishment. If you disobeyed orders, lagged behind, or showed any sign of cowardice, you were punished harshly. We're talking beatings, floggings, public humiliation, sometimes execution. Your commanders needed discipline and fear, kept the army moving. They couldn't afford kindness, and remember, you weren't getting paid much, if at all. Lords often promised wages but delivered little. Maybe a coin here or there. Maybe loot from a burned village. That was your paycheck, and if the campaign failed or the Lord got killed, your chances of ever seeing that promised reward vanished with him. You were risking your life for someone else's grudge, for someone else's power, and often there was nothing in it for you. And let's say you made it to your destination, maybe a castle under siege, maybe a border that needed defending. You didn't get a hero's welcome. You got more orders, more waiting, more sleepless night sieges. Could last for weeks or months. You might camp in a field outside the walls, starving in the cold while disease swept through the ranks. And every once in a while, they'd send you running at the walls just to see if the defenders were awake. So even when you weren't in open battle, you were still dying, just slower. This is the reality of the medieval soldier. Not a glorious knight in shining armor, but a tired, hungry, frightened man in a muddy tunic, dragging a cracked shield and praying he'd see home again. The songs didn't sing about this part. There were no bards telling tales of the 15-mile march through rain and blood. There were no epic poems about trench foot or starvation. But this was the life. That was the job. March, eat, fight, sleep, repeat, until you dropped or were lucky enough to be dismissed. And what happened when you were dismissed? When the war was over, you might think, great, I'm free now, I can go home. Sure, if you had a home to return to. Some soldiers returned to find their village burned or their family gone. Others had been gone so long they were strangers in their own land. Some turned to banditry. They knew how to fight and steal, so they kept doing it just without the Lord's permission. And let's not forget about the mental toll. These men saw things no one should see, watched their friends die, heard screams in the dark, lived in constant fear and pain. There was no counseling, no recovery time, no understanding of trauma. You were expected to shut up, suck it up, and move on. So, again, ask yourself, do you still want to walk in those boots? Do you still think carrying a sword meant honor? Or do you see it now? The long, hard path filled with pain and suffering that came with being a medieval soldier marching toward misery wasn't a metaphor. It was a daily reality. And for most men, it was the only road they'd ever know. The armor you wore was a trap. Let's talk about something everyone thinks they understand. Armor, shiny, heavy, impressive. It's the iconic image of the medieval warrior. A brave knight clanking into battle with steel plates gleaming in the sun. But here's the truth. That image is mostly fantasy. And for most medieval soldiers, armor wasn't protection. It was a prison. First of all, full suits of plate armor, the ones you see in movies and museums, were extremely rare. Only the wealthiest knights could afford them. The average soldier was stuck with the basics, and even those basics were uncomfortable and dangerous in their own way. The most common piece of armor for a regular foot soldier was a padded gambeson. It looked like a thick quilted jacket made from layers of linen and wool. It was hot, itchy, and soaked up every drop of sweat, rain, and blood you came into contact with. It smelled terrible and never fully dried, and it rubbed your skin raw on top of that. If you were lucky, maybe you got a mail shirt or a bit of chainmail to wear over it. Sounds fancy, right? Wrong. Mail was heavy, and it pinched. It weighed between 15 and 25 kilograms, and most of it rested on your shoulders, pulling you down with every step in. Let's talk about helmets, because those were actually more common. Soldiers wore simple iron or steel helmets, usually with a nose guard or cheek plates. They offered decent protection, sure, but they also made it hard to hear, and even harder too. Breathe during a fight now. Try to imagine wearing all of that while marching for hours, or swinging a weapon in the middle of battle. Your body overheats fast, your neck strains under the weight, your vision is limited, your movements are slower than they would be without it. That armor didn't make you invincible. It just gave you a few extra seconds before something killed you. And you know what else? It made you a target. Enemies could spot a well-armored soldier from across the field. That meant archers took aim at you, and other foot soldiers tried to swarm you. If you had mail or steel, they assumed you were important, even if you were just another nameless guy trying not to die. But let's say you do get hit. An arrow slams into your side, or a mace comes crashing down onto your shoulder. You might survive the blow thanks to your armor, but the force still gets transferred into your body. Bones break, bruises bloom, organs rupture beneath the surface. You're still down. You're still screaming, and heaven forbid you fall over while wearing full gear. Getting up was a battle all by itself. Your limbs were restricted. Your joints barely moved. If you got knocked on your back, you were like a flipped turtle struggling in the mud while someone ran over to finish the job. Oh, and here's something nobody tells you: armor didn't make you immune to heat stroke or frostbite. If it was summer, that metal baked you alive. If it was winter, it froze you solid. There was no temperature control, no padding that kept you comfortable. You suffered in every season, and armor wasn't personalized like you see in video games. You didn't walk into a blacksmith shop and get measured. Most armor was reused or passed down from dead soldiers. You wore what fit, and sometimes it didn't fit at all. Too tight and you couldn't breathe. Too loose and it slipped at the worst moment. Straps broke, rivets popped, plates rusted, mail links snapped. That stuff wasn't magical. It decayed like everything else, and maintaining it was a full-time job. One you didn't have time for. If you were really unlucky, your armor could even get you killed. Imagine this: you're crossing a river during a march or retreat. You slip, your armor fills with water. Sink, you drown before anyone can even try to pull you out. And after battle, you'd have to strip it off if you could. Your fingers numb, your arms sore, but you couldn't rest yet. You had to clean it, dry it, patch it up, because if you didn't, that rusty piece of junk would betray you the next time it mattered. Even sleeping in armor was awful. You couldn't lie comfortably. You couldn't roll over. And if you didn't take it off, you risked infections and open sores. If you did take it off, and someone attacked at night, well, good luck getting dressed in time. The idea that armor made you safe is one of the biggest lies told about medieval warfare. It gave you a small edge, maybe a chance to block one or two hits, but most of the time, it just slowed you down, tired you out, and made your suffering heavier. And let's not forget the emotional weight. Armor was a constant reminder that your life was in danger. You didn't wear it unless you expected violence. It was like walking around with a coffin strapped to your chest every day. For commanders, armor was a symbol of power. For kings, it was decoration. For you, it was a necessary evil that might save you or might betray you in the worst moment. Even horses had armor sometimes. But guess who had to carry and manage that armor when it wasn't on the horse? That's right, you, and that gear wasn't cheap. If you lost it or broke it, you might owe your lord more money than you'd see in 10 years. It wasn't just your body at risk, it was your future. So no armor wasn't a blessing. It was a burden, a heavy, clunky, sweaty reminder that everything around you wanted to kill you, and that you were expected to survive anyway. Stories make it sound noble. The armor gleams. The hero charges into battle. But in real life, it was just another layer of discomfort, pain, and danger in a soldier's already Miserable existence next time you see a gleaming suit of armor in a museum. Remember that it wasn't built for beauty. It was built for desperation, for survival, for pain, and most of the time it didn't work as well as people think. Starvation discussed, and the art of eating like a soldier cell. By now you've survived the marching, the fighting, the infections, and the armor choking the life out of you, great. But now your stomach's growling, and guess what? There's no snack break. In medieval warfare, food was not something you could count on. It wasn't scheduled, it wasn't balanced, and it definitely wasn't clean. Let's start with what you probably ate. If anything, soldiers lived mostly on hard stale bread, and if they were lucky, some dried peas or beans. Maybe salted meat if your army had supplies, and if it hadn't already gone rancid. That bread, by the way, was not the soft warm stuff you're picturing. It was more like a rock. You had to dip it in water or wine just to chew it, and it was often full of dirt, mold, and sometimes bugs. Yes, bugs. You didn't throw it away. You ate it because you were starving. And when we say salted meat, we don't mean jerky with flavor. We mean slabs of tough, chewy pork or beef, packed in so much salt it could dry your lips into leather. It preserved the meat, sure, but it also sucked every drop of moisture from your mouth. Sometimes you'd boil it if you had fire and water, but usually you just gnawed on it like an animal. And water, don't even think about clean water. Water came from rivers, puddles, or barrels filled days ago, which had been sitting in the sun collecting every lovely thing from mosquitoes to mud. Drinking it was a gamble. You might get lucky, or you might spend the next 3 days squatting in the bushes with your insides, trying to escape your body. Wine and ale were safer, oddly enough. Low alcohol levels killed some of the bacteria, but of course that meant everyone walked around slightly buzzed. Half the time, including your commander's fresh fruits and vegetables, almost never made it to the battlefield. They rotted too quickly, and nobody wasted precious cart space hauling lettuce to war. Sometimes you'd forage, which basically meant digging up roots, berries, or whatever you could shove in your mouth that didn't kill you on contact. And if you were really desperate, you ate rats, you ate dogs, you ate whatever was left on the battlefield. There are reports from long sieges where soldiers ate leather, boiled shoes, even chewed on candle wax, just to trick their stomachs into thinking something was there. Now, let's talk about where you ate. On the road, there were no mess halls, no tables. You sat on the ground, maybe with a wooden bowl, or maybe just your hands wring. Mud, flies, and the constant stink of unwashed bodies all mixed together during meals. You'd eat while swatting flies off your face, while dogs barked, and maybe while someone groaned in pain 5 feet away from you. You think that ruins your appetite. Think again. Hunger didn't care about smells. Hunger didn't care about bloodstains. You ate what you could when you could, and you prayed it didn't kill you later, and hygiene around food didn't exist. No one washed their hands. There were no utensils, just dirty fingers wiping noses and then reaching for bread. Diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and cholera spread fast once food and water were contaminated. And in a medieval army, everything was contaminated. If one guy got sick, 20 others would be right behind him. And once disease hit the camp, it could do more damage than the enemy ever did. Now, let's say you're on the move, supplies low, no food in sight. What happens then? You loot villages along the way became your grocery store. Except you didn't pay. You stormed in, took whatever was edible, and moved on. It didn't matter if it belonged to a poor family or an old widow. You needed food, and your commander said take it. Some soldiers hated it. Some got used to it. Others reveled in it. That's how desperation twists people. And if there was no food in the village, you burned it anyway, to punish them, to send a message, to stop the enemy from using it later. So not only were you starving, you were also part of the cycle of destruction that made other people starve too. That's the part no one likes to admit, that soldiers weren't just victims. They were also the reason so many civilians suffered. Now, let's get really grim. Sometimes In long sieges, when food completely ran out, soldiers did the unthinkable. There are dark records of cannibalism. Soldiers eating the dead, enemy soldiers' friends. Anyone you think that's legend? Think again. Starvation makes monsters out of men. When your ribs poke through your skin and your stomach cramps like it's folding in half, you will eat what you must to stay alive. Even when food did come, it wasn't enough. You didn't get full. You didn't get seconds. The officers ate first. Knights took their share. The regular foot soldiers got whatever scraps remained, and if you dared complain about it, you were punished. Shut up and eat, or don't eat at all. Your energy levels were always low. You were always dizzy, tired, your vision blurry from malnutrition, and yet they still expected you to fight. March, lift, build, carry, swing, bleed, and never complain you. Think being a soldier meant strength, but the truth is most medieval soldiers were chronically malnourished, skin and bone, held together by sheer willpower and fear. And remember, there were no vitamins, no supplements, no science behind nutrition, just guesswork and survival instincts. If someone had garlic, they thought it would keep the plague away. If someone had onions, they thought it gave you strength. But mostly you just prayed that your next bite wouldn't make you sick or kill you. And when you finally went home, if you ever did, your body was ruined. Your teeth gone, your stomach weak. You couldn't digest normal food anymore. Your time as a soldier left you broken inside and out. So the next time you see a movie with a laughing soldier tearing into a roasted chicken beside a fire, remember that was a fantasy. Truth was hunger every single day, sickness at every meal, and fear every time you swallowed. Because in the medieval army, food wasn't fuel, it was torture in disguise. The enemy wasn't the only thing trying to kill you. When people imagine war, they think of the enemy. A rival army charging across the battlefield, swords, swinging arrows, flying fire and fury. That's what the stories focus on, the clash of steel, the brave final stand. But if you were a medieval soldier, the truth was, your biggest enemy wasn't always the one in front of you. Was everything else. Let's start with disease. We've mentioned it before, but it deserves its own spotlight because it was relentless. You were packed in with hundreds, even thousands of men in filthy conditions. Soap, no sanitation, no fresh clothes, no clean water. Lice lived in your clothes and hair, spreading disease from body to body. Rats chewed through your supplies at night and left droppings where you slept. Flies landed on wounds, on food, and on your face, and no one had the energy to swat them. Any more camp fevers ran wild. Dysentery would sweep through the army, leaving a trail of weakened and dying men. It was normal to hear groans in the dark, soldiers clutching their stomachs, vomiting into the dirt, or worse. It didn't matter if you were strong or tough. One bad meal, one infected wound, one sip from the wrong stream, and you could be dead in 3 days. But even if you avoided sickness, you were not safe. Because now we need to talk about the weather. You were not protected from the elements. There was no modern gear, no thermal socks or waterproof boots. You wore whatever you were given and hoped it held together. When it rained, you were soaked. When it snowed, you froze. When the sun baked the earth, you roasted inside your armor like meat in a metal oven. Winter was especially cruel. Your hands would go numb. Your toes would blacken. You couldn't light fires without giving away your position. So you just curled up in your cloak and prayed the night wouldn't kill you. And summer wasn't much better. Sweat soaked your clothes, and never dried chafing turned into bleeding. You drank warm water that tasted like swamp and got sunburned so bad your skin peeled like parchment. Exposure was the silent killer. You wouldn't even realize you were dying until you couldn't stand up anymore. Then came hunger. You know this already, but it bears repeating. A hungry man is not a strong man. A soldier with an empty belly is half dead already. And hunger twisted people, turned brothers into thieves, best friends into enemies. Food became more valuable than gold. And when your mind is starving, your decisions get worse. That's where accidents happened. You dropped your weapon in the middle of a fight. You stumbled over a root. You lit a fire too close to a wagon of oilmen. Or killed in stupid ways all the time. They tripped, slipped. They got crushed under a falling tent pole. They were kicked by horses or impaled by friendly spears. And speaking of friendly spears, let's talk about your own army, because the men next to you were often just as dangerous as the ones across. The field-drunken fights where constant tempers were short, morale was low. If someone took your share of food or insulted your family back home, that could turn into a fatal brawl. Knives came out over stolen boots or the last bit of dried meat. One wrong look and someone might bury a blade in your side. And if you were new or came from a different region, you were a target. Outsiders were bullied, beaten, hazed. Some were never accepted at all. There were no HR departments, no fairness, no justice. You survived by keeping your head down and your fists ready. Now, let's add the commanders into this mess. Most of them didn't care about you. You were a number, a tool, a body to fill the front line. Some were cruel. Others were just stupid. There. Bad decisions got men killed every day, sending you into hopeless charges, leaving you without food or shelter, choosing pride over strategy. And if you questioned them, you were punished, whipped, tied to a post, starved, humiliated. You had no voice. Rights. You were a pawn in someone else's game, and if your army lost the battle or got overrun, the real nightmare began. Retreats were chaos. No order, no protection. Just panic men trampled each other trying to flee. Horses bolted, leaving riders behind. Equipment was tossed aside in desperation. If you got separated, you were done. No backup, no rescue. You hid or died. If the enemy caught you alive and realized you were just a peasant soldier with nothing to offer, they didn't bother with mercy. Executions were brutal. Some were hanged, others beheaded or thrown into pits. Some were simply tortured for information, then tossed aside. Prisoners weren't always fed or sheltered. Some were worked to death, others were left to rot. You weren't treated like a person. You were seen as waste, and the fear of all this never left you. It stayed in your bones. Every moment was soaked in it. Every meal, every night, every second spent wondering if your last breath would come from an enemy's sword or your own. Body giving out from exhaustion. You never felt safe, not in camp, not on the road, not even in moments of victory, because even then you knew the cycle would start again. Another campaign, another march, another chance to bleed and scream and disappear, and nobody would remember your name. No statue, no song. Just a shallow grave in a field that would be forgotten by morning. So, when people talk about honor or glory in medieval warfare, they are talking about the fantasy. The truth is that the soldier's greatest enemy was not another man with a sword. It was everything else, and it never stopped coming. Coming home was not a happy ending. You survived. Congratulations. Against all odds, you made it through the blood, the mud, the screaming, and the sickness. Your sword is dull. Your boots are worn to nothing. Your body aches in places you didn't even know could ache. But you're alive now. It's time to go home, except home isn't what you remember. And you're not who you used to be. Let's start with the journey back. You don't get a horse. You don't get an escort. You walk, and you're walking through the same landscape that tried to kill you on the way. In cold, wet forests, empty farmlands, villages burned down from the very war you just fought in there. Snow welcome party waiting at the gates. No crowds cheering, no medals or banners. No one is tossing flowers at your feet. You show up covered in grime, looking like a ghost, barely able to carry your own gear, and people don't celebrate your return. They stare because to them, you're not a hero. You're a problem. You see war changes a man, and not in the poetic way the bards pretend it does. You left as a son, a brother, maybe a farmer, or a craftsman. You return as something else, someone who's seen friends die, someone who's done terrible things just to survive, someone who doesn't sleep well anymore. Someone who flinches at sudden noises and sees blood every time they close their eyes. But the world doesn't care. There's no word for trauma in your time. No understanding of what it means to be mentally broken. They call you cursed. They call you weak. They tell you to get back to work. And work is another nightmare. Because your farm's overgrown or gone. Your tools are rusted. Your animal's dead. Your family might have moved on or not survived at all. The Lord you fought for doesn't know your name and doesn't care that you bled for him. There's no pension, no payment, no plan if you are promised land or coin chances, or it never comes. Those promises were made for morale, not reality. And if you try to find work in the town, you quickly realize nobody wants a man who only knows how to kill. So what do? Some turn to crime. They know how to swing a blade, how to intimidate, how to survive in shadows. Banditry becomes a tempting path, not because they're evil, but because they're desperate. Others try to forget. They drink until the memories fade or the coin runs out. They gamble, they fight in back alleys. They waste away in corners of taverns, telling stories no one wants to hear. And some don't last long at all. Their bodies give out after months or years of untreated wounds, sickness, and starvation. The war might be over, but it still claims them slowly and painfully. Now imagine you're one of the rare few who manage to hold it together. You find your village intact, your family waiting, maybe even a job waiting for you. You try to settle back into normal life, but it's never normal again, because you can't stop hearing the screams. You can't stop dreaming of that one battle where your friend died in your arms, or where you almost drowned in the mud, or where you saw a man begging for mercy before the sword came down. No one talks about those things. Not at dinner, not in church, not every hour told to be thankful. You're told to be proud, but you don't feel either. Feel empty, and you're not alone. Most returning soldiers carry that same darkness in their eyes, the same stiffness in their movements, like they're always waiting for another command. Some form little groups staying close to each other, because only another soldier understands what they've been through. Even those bonds fade over time. Some go mad, some disappear into the woods. Some just stop talking altogether, and history forgets them because the stories don't remember the survivors. Only the legends, the knights, the nobles, the ones who rode horses and had songs written about them. No. One sings about the foot soldier who spent 3 winters in a tent made of rags, or the archer who lost his fingers to frostbite, or the boy who came home a man, but too broken to smile again. You weren't just fighting the enemy. You were fighting to hold on to your humanity. And most of the time that was the battle you lost. And yet, you're told to be proud of the things you did to stay alive. Proud of the people you left behind. Proud of the pain you now carry like a second skin. And maybe you try to believe it. Maybe you try to walk tall with your head high, like they say you should. But deep down you know the truth. You survived not because of glory or honor or fate. You survived because you got lucky. And because you were too stubborn to die. That's it. No parade, no gold. Just a scarred body and a head full of memories no one wants to hear. And that is why it wasn't good to be a medieval soldier. Not because of the swords or the battles, not even the wounds or the fear, but because when the war ended, you were still fighting. Fighting to be seen, fighting to be heard, fighting to be whole again, and the world moved on without you.